From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. Some unexpected trends with the next generation of farmers.
It's been said that for baby boomers, that technology needs to be as simple as 1, 2, 3. But for Gen Z, it needs to be as simple as 1. Meaning, if you don't get a second and third chance, if it doesn't work immediately out the gates.
And stories about how one young producer is recasting the future with a vision and drive to carry her family's legacy toward the future.
I'm extremely privileged. I come from a long history of farming. I'm a 6th generation farmer. I will inherit land that's been in our family for over 100 years.
And remember all those farmer protests across Europe this past year? Well, farmer frustrations are now sparking change.
The protests, I think, have been significant in making politicians and the general public aware of the importance of taking into account the farming perspective in setting all these regulations.
And the message it sent during the big EU elections this past weekend were loud and clear.
U.S. Farm Report, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when the testing grounds meet the proving grounds. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Now for the news, the latest USDA supply and demand report really wasn't a big market mover for corn or soybeans, but forecasters mainly focused on wheat as well as what USDA did with South American production. Well, USDA raising the production forecast for hard red winter wheat production, which offset cuts in soft red winter wheat and winter wheat. The all wheat production forecast is now at 1.87 billion bushels. That's up 17 million from last month. The all wheat yield to 49.4 bushels per acre. And checking ending stocks, corn unchanged from last month at 2 billion bushels for old crop, 2.1 billion still for new. Soybeans at 350 million bushels for old crop, up 10 million bushels. And new crop, that stayed the same. Now wheat unchanged for old crop at 688 million bushels and down 8 million bushels for new crop, but still higher than last year. We'll take a look at what changes USDA made for South American production coming up in our marketing roundtable. Well, another thing being closely watched by the markets and everyone in farming, actions by the Federal Reserve, which once again decided to leave interest rates unchanged. Forecasters not surprised by the decision. It leaves the Fed's benchmark interest rate at the range of 5.25% to 5.5%. It's been at that amount for almost a year. However, a new consumer price index was also released, and it showed inflation did ease in May for a second straight month. If that trend holds, there's hope that it will encourage the Fed to cut the benchmark interest rate from its 23-year peak. Tommy Grisafi of Advanced Trading says interest rates are top of mind right now.
Interest rates are on everyone's mind. Even though you see the price of the raw commodity like corn coming down, Clinton, that's not happening when you go to the grocery store, as you know. Things are still expensive, and it's a tax on all working people.
Consumer prices, excluding food and energy costs, rose 0.2% from April to May. That was the smallest such increase since October. But groceries, rent, and health care still are much higher than they were 3 years ago. Well, Iowa is getting hit again by another round of ag-related layoffs. This time, it's the Bridgestone Firestone tire plant in Des Moines. The Des Moines Register says the plant makes most of the company's tractor tires. Bridgestone America is confirming the layoffs to Farm Journal, saying it notified a local United Steelworkers leadership in Des Moines that it had made the difficult decision to reduce positions due to demand constraints in the ag tire sector. The newspaper reports the company told employees the layoffs will take effect early next month and could impact 118 of the plant's 900 workers. It also says the layoffs are the first at the plant since 1990. One county in California is looking to ban large poultry and livestock operations. It's known in Sonoma County as Measure J. The animal activist group Direct Action Everywhere led the efforts to get the measure on the November ballot. The group claims the operations they label as factory farms pollute the environment and mistreat animals through close confinement. Meanwhile, farmers view the measure as an attack on their livelihood and argue it would force many of their operations to downsize or shut down, which would have significant economic repercussions. If passed, Sonoma County would be the first county in the U.S. to implement such a ban. The Sonoma County Farm Bureau estimates the measure would impact at least 60 poultry and livestock operations. All right, that's it for the news. Well, some torrential rains hitting Florida this weekend, causing massive flooding. We'll have a check of your forecast coming up next.
U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. Maximize baleage yield with less time and effort with the LW1100 line wrap bale wrapper. You can wrap round or square bales, and the automatic operating mode allows for a one-person operation.
Well, Florida continuing to get hit with heavy rain this week. Miami area seeing 6 inches of rain in a matter of hours, with other areas getting as much as a foot of rain in just 2 days. In Sarasota, they received a record-breaking 8 inches of rain in just 3 hours Tuesday evening, bringing with it flash flooding. 3.93 inches of rain also fell at the Sarasota-Bradenton Airport in 1 hour, which was also a record. But in other areas like parts of the Midwest, dryness is starting to creep back into the picture. We have meteorologist Matt Engelbrecht joining us now with your forecast.
Overall, looking at that drought monitor, going to be pretty interesting to watch as we go through this week. Now, last Thursday when this drought monitor came out, you can kind of see areas where we've had a good amount of rainfall. But since then, Florida has popped up with a number of showers, feet of rainfall this past week. Again, this drought monitor is going to be updated this Thursday. So look for that drought to be alleviated, and the potential is there. Based on what we're seeing with the ridge of high pressure, the high temperatures, 10 to 15, possibly 20 degrees above average, the Midwest and the East Coast, while there's just a little yellow now, we may start talking about the dry or even the moderate part of this drought increasing, expanding through the Midwest and the East Coast with the pattern that I'm seeing in the next 4 to 5 days. So again, coming up this Thursday, we'll revisit the drought monitor map, get an update on that. I'm expecting this to go away, but that drought to possibly increase or at least start to show up, early signs of a drought to show up back up in the Midwest and the East Coast. Still looking at extreme to exceptional drought through New Mexico, but also into Texas. Estimated rainfall the next 7 days, and what you're going to see is a pocket of no rain. Where that ridge of high pressure is expected to sit is also the area where we're expected the hottest temperatures and the driest conditions. Up around that high is where that rainfall is going to be increasing over the next 7 days. So remember that drought monitor map that we just looked at with the kind of heat that we're expecting, 15 to 20 degrees above average without any rainfall, is going to suck a lot of that water out of the soil for those locations. Otherwise, flooding potential is going to be there for parts of Iowa and also into Minnesota and northern Wisconsin, right along kind of that saddle point between the ridge of high pressure and a trough that's going to try to move through and move back up here towards the north and to the northeast. Let's go and take a look at that. When I talk about a saddle point, that is the point between the high and, I should say, the ridge and the trough. This is Sunday and into Monday. See that ridge building out here towards the east? There's that next trough digging out here to the northwest. So between this trough and this ridge, that saddle point is going to be right up here where we're going to get some rainfall, possibly some flooding concerns, and back up towards Tuesday and Wednesday. By Thursday and Friday, still ridge of high pressure dominating a good portion of the United States, nearly 2/3 of the United States.
When we come back, well, as we told you in news, the WASDE report wasn't a big market mover, but there are a few things to watch. Plus, the acreage debate is heating up as we get new numbers at the end of the month. We'll talk to our analysts, Dan Bossy and Arlen Suderman, about it after the break. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. This Father's Day weekend, we have some all-star dads that we're chatting with this weekend for our markets, Arlen Suderman as well as Dan Bossy. Arlen, USDA report this week, WASDE report, the June report, typically not a big market watch for just because we are waiting for that June acreage report, but we did see some adjustments to wheat. Bigger U.S. supplies did lower that Russian crop, but when you look at wheat supplies overall, what was the most surprising to you?
Yeah, on the wheat, I think it came in pretty much as expected, really. No real surprises. I think Ukraine at 19.5 million metric tons is kind of where we expected it. Russia at 83 million metric tons is at the high end of the estimates, but that's not unusual for USDA to be conservative in going there. We would anticipate more losses. coming up in future reports. The real key is going to be when they restrict exports, if they do. They say they won't, but we anticipate that that may happen at some point. And then does India enter the import market this year? Turkey pulling out for the next 4 months of importing any wheat is really kind of a blow in the near term because that's during the gut slot of harvest for Russia when they like to move things through. But that doesn't mean they're not going to run short on wheat later on in the marketing year and restrict exports at that point. So that's really going to be the key on the wheat side, I think, and that's probably going to be the bigger factor than even the size of the U.S. crop, because we tend to trade Black Sea fundamentals in the Chicago market more than we trade U.S. fundamentals.
Well, Dan, out of this report, we're also watching what happened with what USDA decided to do with Brazil's crop. And so when you look at some of those changes there, we also saw CONAB come out Thursday morning with an updated estimate there. What do we need to know? Did we see any big changes with the crop in Brazil?
Well, there was a 1 million metric ton decline on soybeans from the USDA to 153. So, that's a step down, but CONAB is at 147, so we still have this 6.5 million metric ton differential, and we still have a corn differential that's over 7 million metric tons. So, the cash markets in Brazil are rising to levels that's pushing China back to the U.S. Gulf. We've had 3 days so far of U.S. soybean sales out of the U.S. Numbers work out of the PNW. So it looks like world demand is shifting back. So in my mind, if Brazil's crop is as big as USDA suggests, we shouldn't have premiums down in Brazil at 65 to 70 cents over. That to me is telling me the crop is smaller. If it's down at CONAB numbers, I'm not quite sure, but I do believe it's maybe in the 150 or under range in Brazil on beans.
Well, Arlen, I know you keep a close eye on Brazil's crop. What is StoneX's current estimate?
Yeah, we're down around 149 on the soybean crop, and we really feel like that's accounting for losses in Rio Grande do Sul due to flooding, which USDA acknowledged in the crop. I might mention that our sources in China are telling us that they're buying U.S. cargoes right now to put in their reserve because the Brazilian beans don't qualify for the reserve program. And so they're buying U.S. as they've also bought about 4.5 million metric tons of Argentine soybeans for shipment this summer for their reserve program as well. But when you look at the bids shipped into after freight and taxes and everything are paid right now into Chinese ports, Brazilian soybeans remain very competitive to U.S. soybeans all the way through September. So I think that's a longer term concern, and China has bought very few U.S. soybeans yet for actual crush in the coming marketing year.
Dan, you mentioned those daily export sales. You mentioned they were China. I mean, we have these daily export sales and they're unknown destinations. I've had a lot of questions from farmers. Why are we seeing all of these sales to unknown destinations? When does it actually show up and show who is buying? And when it says unknown destinations, is that always China?
It's not always China. It can be Europe. There can be a lot of things happening. Of course, we have Europe coming on with new regulations in terms of deforestation areas. We'll see how that shifts back to the U.S. Of course, the U.S. all U.S. soybeans don't have to worry about deforestation or forest issues under EU law. So there's a lot of things happening internationally. Relative to China, my grids show they're a little closer on PNW beans, maybe taking them in September. I think the U.S. will have a little more runway. I don't disagree with USDA's 1.8 billion bushel soybean estimate for China, at least at this point. We'll see what happens. But, as the market steps back, it's still all about weather and these declining crop numbers and how this all works into the mixture longer term.
Well, when we come back, we need to talk about acreage because there's still a lot of debate about where those 6 million acres of principal crops, where that went in the March survey and that report from USDA, and where we could see that possibly show up on the June acreage report. So we'll debate acreage coming up right after the break. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Arlen Suderman as well as Dan Bosse. All right, Arlen, now that we have the June WASDE report out of the way, we're watching to see really what USDA does at the end of the month, coming up with the June acreage report. And as I mentioned before the break, there's still a lot of debate right now about where that 6 million acres of principal crops, where that went. Do you think we will see that show up somewhere in this June report?
Historically, we struggle to get those acres back. that's part of the big USDA acreage mystery. I do think that we'll get a little bit of it back into corn and soybeans. Right now, I'd be looking for planted acres to go up by about as much as 1 million acres in that report, and soybeans up maybe as much as 500,000 acres. I think one of the keys on the soybeans is going to be with the soft red winter wheat crop in the Midwest advancing more mature than normal. That's going to facilitate, with the moisture we have, more double cropping in those regions that typically do double crop up in the southern part of the belt. And so we may pick up some more soybeans there. And I think so both of those acres could actually increase. And I think USDA understated corn in the last survey in particular.
Yeah, we'll continue to debate what that number actually is in Argentina. Even after the acreage report, Dan, we'll continue to debate what the acreage number is here in the U.S. But what are some wild cards that we should possibly prepare ourselves for in that June acreage report? And then where do you personally set with acreage?
Yeah, so our surveys at Ag Resource show the U.S. corn acreage being down 500,000 acres. We're at 89.5. We've added 1 million acres onto soybeans, so we're at 87.5. So that's what the surveys show from our analysis. As I go backwards and I think about the report, I would recommend to everybody that we did add almost 1 million acres of to CRP program last year. And when we look at Prevent Plant and do our surveys, we think there'll be another 1 million acres of corn and soybeans combined in Prevent Plant this year relative to last year at around 4 million acres. So putting it all together, I guess I'm 89.5 on corn, like I said, 87.5 on beans. We'll see how the numbers come out, but that's a really important data set at the end of the month.
Another important thing that we're watching in the economy is what the Fed was doing with interest rates this week. And Dan, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said policymakers will need to see more positive data, including good inflation readings, before it feels confident enough to lower those interest rates. So heading into the year, we were debating, will we see 3 interest rate cuts, 2? How many rate cuts will we see this year? Now that we're here in June, where do you sit?
We're sitting at 1. We're not that far away from the Fed. We think there'll be a rate cut maybe in the fourth quarter. We think inflation stays stickier, and at some point, I'm not sure, don't doubt it's this year, but the Fed may have to raise its target from 2%. I think getting to 2%, that last mile, is going to be really difficult. And with that, that's the only thing propping up the U.S. dollar right now. I do think that yesterday you saw the U.S. dollar fall sharply. We're looking for a dollar break, if you will, heading into the end of the year as we think about additional rate cuts next year.
Arlen, do you agree with that?
Well, we've said for the last 6 months we didn't expect a rate cut this year unless they give in to political pressure or unless we really see a collapse in the economy, particularly in the jobs market. And right now we don't see that. And the Fed is continuing to move our way. We have also felt like we'd be returning more toward the interest rates more common in the 90s and early 2000s. And if you look at the Fed statements, they're starting to move in that direction as well, although slow to do so. We just don't see how we can go back down to those low interest rates, particularly in the medium and longer end of the yield curve with the fiscal spending problem that we have right now.
Arlen, Dan, I really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much for joining us this weekend. We need to take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on U.S. Farm Report.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. This week a special story for you. A father and a daughter who love their John Deere H.
Tractor that I bought from an auction, Deere's smallest 2-cylinder tractor, and I figured we've got the biggest in diesel and gas, so we had to have the smallest too. It's too big for a garden tractor. It's basically too small for field work of any size, but I guess if you had 20 acres or something, it might fit in fine. It was just something else to add into the collection. It was a little tractor. It just looked like it'd be kind of fun to play with, and I'm a little too big for it.
Who taught you to drive this tractor?
Dad. At the Antique Engine Tractor Association, they have a show in the fall. I drive it in their parade, and then I drive around the farm. So you push this forward, and then you just drive. These are your brakes. The larger the tractor, the harder it is for me to get in, and the harder it is for me to control it. I like to be able to know glass, because sometimes there'll be reflections and they bug me. I like to be out in the open. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then reverse. I normally have it in 1 or 2. If Dad's driving it, it's in 3. because I fit on it, and when I have to use a pedal, my legs aren't long enough, so my feet don't reach, so I like hand.
It looked just like it did today, but it didn't run. I rebuilt the carb and the mag, and that's about it. Did a little touch-up paint on it, but nothing serious. Keep it in the collection, keep getting it out, playing with it, have fun. From my experience, apparently a lot of people didn't know about it. So it draws attention. It could pull a small one-bottom plow. That was about the extent of what it could do. It goes to the antique tractor show. It doesn't really see much time on the farm unless my daughter's out hot rodding around the yard warming it up.
When we come back, millennials and Gen Z can get kind of a bad rap at times, but we've uncovered some new research that shows next-gen farmers may be more practical than you think. That's our Farm Journal report coming up next.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Well, this entire week at Farm Journal, we've been celebrating the next generation of American agriculture. The goal is to not only highlight success stories, but to also encourage next-gen farmers to plan for the future and cultivate multi-generational success through the transfer of skills and knowledge. Well, this weekend, we explore the trends that are driving the next generation of farmers in our Farm Journal report, and a few may surprise you.
Right here? Yeah.
USDA's latest Census of Agriculture shows less than 10% of all producers in the U.S. are under the age of 35 today, and even fewer are under the age of 30. But those who do have the opportunity are jumping at the chance to come back to the farm.
I think deep down, I always knew I wanted to come back and be involved somehow. So I think little by little, I just kind of realized like, hey, there's a huge opportunity here for me to take over this operation.
My dream ever since a kid was to be a full-time farmer. This is vacation. This is literally what I love, a physical farm.
USDA data shows farmers under the age of 40 may be a rare breed, but new research shows that trend may be changing. Farm Journal surveyed next-gen farmers and found more are taking charge of farm operations, despite not having formal succession plans in place. The survey uncovered this: 80% of younger farmers identify as the owner-operator, even though a legal transition of ownership has not occurred. In fact, 58% of younger farmers surveyed said they don't have a formal succession plan in place. And Farm CPA Paul Neefer says retirement is playing a role in the younger generations coming back to the farm.
Even us baby boomers, we're more willing to retire than the generation before us. Well, we want to have our free time. Now we want to drive the tractor, drive the combine, but we want to retire. So I definitely see a lot more of that, especially the millennials, even some of the older Gen Zs, they are taking over a lot of the decisions, and mom and dad are fine with that.
Terry Griffin is a professor in the Department of Ag Economics at Kansas State University. He says the generational shift in agriculture is something he's been studying closely.
We're seeing a decline in the proportion of the oldest generation. The silent generation is decreasing every year, and those are being replaced largely by millennial and Gen Z farms. Plus, we have several multi-generational farms as well.
But Griffin says as younger farmers desire to use more technology on the farm, they don't always have the money to do so.
And what we're seeing with multi-generation farms is that if you have an older generation and a younger generation, they tend to have more technology than either of those farms on their own as sole proprietors. So a Gen Z farm on their own may not have the technology due to lack of resources. And a silent generation farm may have a lack of technology due to disinterest. But put those two together with the financial resources and the interest, and they typically have more technology than other farms.
Farm Journal's survey of next-gen farmers asked them, when thinking about technology, which of the following best describes you? More than half responded they adopt new technologies when it's practical, and 28% say they let others try it first, but they are next in line.
We've all seen some of the older farm operators who would stay with the same ag retailer, the same co-op, for the same bank, ag lender, maybe for longer than they should have. The younger generation, I'm observing, doesn't do that so much. They're looking for the lowest cost.
Griffin says another big difference between younger and older generations is their expectation of how technology works.
And it's been said that for baby boomers, that technology needs to be as simple as 1, 2, 3. But for Gen Z, it needs to be as simple as 1. Meaning, if you don't get a second and third chance, if it doesn't work immediately out the gates.
The Farm Journal survey found of the younger producers coming back to the farm, they're taking the biggest lead on managing finance and budgeting, as well as making equipment purchasing decisions and deciding what conservation practices to use on the farm. And Griffin says whether it's technology or other purchases, next-gen farmers are often looking for the best deal and aren't necessarily brand loyal.
One of the things I've noticed in ag retail also is instead of selling a product, they may sell a bundle of products. So not just CPCs, crop protection chemicals, maybe a whole acre of inputs. So for the younger generation who may not be wanting to be as detail oriented, they made the option of buying inputs by the acre instead of by the jug.
Finding cost savings on the farm while being efficient in what they do. Nefer says with next-gen farmers, they're finding ways to work smarter, not necessarily harder.
They are willing to work hard, but they're also willing to step back and say, what can we do to make this job easier, more efficient, versus maybe us older generation, hey, we're just going to muddle through and get it done, and we'll do it because we've always done it that way.
From wanting instant feedback to prioritizing family and watching their kids play sports versus working around the clock, Nefer says it's also a generation that's hungry for information.
These days, when you're dealing with marketing a crop that's $5 or $10 million or more, having real-time accounting information at your fingertips, is very important in order to make those informed decisions. So I think that younger generation, they understand that real-time accounting concept, and it's much easier for them to pick that up and run with it than maybe people at my age.
Griffin also told me the biggest issue he sees is battling misinformation with the next-gen farmers. Well, when we come back, farmer protests in Europe garnered global attention over the past year, and it's now sparking change. It's a look at ag around the world next.
Introducing Unscripted with Tyne Morgan and Clinton Griffiths. Real, raw, and entertaining. A new episode is available every Friday on Farm Journal's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now for a glimpse of ag around the world. With months of farmer protests leading up to the elections in Europe, the European Parliament elections over the weekend sent a clear message. And one economist says it's not just frustrations from farmers that fueled the election results, it's also EU voters who are worried about the cost of environmental reforms. It's an issue that's been brewing for the past year, with farmer protests showing the frustration.
Things have been slowly coming to the boil over the last 12 months or so. But really, the origins of all this are traceable back to, I guess, when the last European Commission came into place, which was in 2019.
Trevor Donnellan is the head of economics at the Rural Economy Research Centre based in Ireland. He says after the 2019 election and the Green Party became more dominant, the push to fast-track climate policies and regulations was swift.
European environmental policy around agriculture is significant. That's the first thing I guess viewers in the US need to understand. And it is becoming more significant. Regulation around things like greenhouse gas emissions is becoming an issue. Regulation around water quality, the usage of fertilizers, what we do with animal waste. These are all becoming more serious issues.
In Donnellan's own country of Ireland, for example, agriculture is required to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the year 2030. He says for a country that has a large dairy and beef production footprint, that could require farmers to reduce their herd size to reach such a lofty goal. In the Netherlands, environmental policy has already forced livestock producers to get rid of animals, even pushing some farmers out of business. That's what propelled farmer protests across the EU, using tractors to block traffic on major highways across Europe over the past year, to even protesting outside the parliament. And it's those protests that sent a loud message.
The protests, I think, have been significant in making politicians and the general public aware of the importance of taking into account the farming perspective in setting all these regulations.
That message was also on the minds of voters this past weekend. That's when the parliament elections showed the 27 nation bloc's parliament membership has shifted to the right, and the surge by nationalists and populist parties will make it much harder for the assembly to approve legislation on issues ranging from climate change to agricultural policy.
When we look at it in terms of what it might mean for agriculture, the kind of political perspective in this new parliament has moved a little bit further to the right, probably is a little bit more aligned with the interests of farmers, and farming is very important in the context of the European Union. It's one of the reasons why the European Union was created in the first place.
He says that could mean less of an emphasis on green issues than what the EU has seen dominate policy the past 5 years.
Looking at it from an agricultural point of view, it could mean that the pace of change in terms of pushing the environmental regulation could maybe slow down a little bit, or there might be a little bit of a rethink on some aspects of it. But it's probably a parliament that might be a little bit more sympathetic to the concerns of farmers than the one that has just come to an end.
Well, it's not clear exactly what will happen with climate policy in the years ahead. Donnellan says what's happening in Europe is setting an example for the rest of the world.
That might sound a little bit grand, but that's kind of the thinking behind this politically, that Europe will demonstrate to the rest of the world what's achievable in terms of having a more environmentally compliant economy, including in agriculture, and that the rest of the world should potentially follow suit from a policy perspective in the future.
Well, when we come back, some advice for next-gen farmers. Chip's Corner is next. Welcome back to Chip's Corner this weekend. Chip, I know you've been on the road all week, AgriTalk on the road, but you've also been covering this next-gen theme that we've had on the show and Farm Journal, focused on next-generation farmers. And Chip, in the Farm Journal report, we uncovered some interesting trends when it comes to younger farmers. You think that they're all in on things, but actually skeptical, low-cost buyers, really practical in how they think about things on the farm. What interesting things have you uncovered this week?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun up here in Southwest Minnesota. We're up here for Merck Animal Health Days, having a great time and meeting some very interesting people. And along the way, of course, we continue to do our shows, including the Farmer Forum on Wednesday on AgriTalk, Wednesday morning. And I talked with two next generation producers, Randy Francis and Tony Mellenthin. Randy from Iowa and Tony from Wisconsin. And I asked them for a piece of advice that they might give to a person that is positioning to come into an operation. And this is what we got from Tony.
If you have a farm, a family farm that's able to bring you back, that means that your parents and grandparents and so forth were pretty successful. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. Bring your own ideas, bring your own thoughts, but understand that there's a lot of farms that cannot bring back a next generation, even if they want to. So if you're fortunate enough where you're able to, just know that your parents and grandparents did some things right.
Yeah, isn't that cool? What we're talking about here, Tyne, is showing respect for the work that's been done before you. Now, with that said, to the established generations that are out there, I would also ask you to show a little respect for the person, the next generation that is coming into the operation. And all you got to do is remember what it was like when you were starting out. I mean, think of how many sleepless nights there were, how scared you were to be jumping into this family operation. And I think that mutual respect that is shown between the generations, it's got to be there if that transition is going to be successful, Tyne.
Well, and funny you mention that, because as we were talking about in the Farm Journal report, the Farm Journal research, what we found is there are more of this next generation farmers. They are coming back to the farm, but the majority of them do not have a formal succession plan in place. So even though they are making some of the seed purchasing decisions, finance, marketing, equipment purchasing decisions, even, Chip, What's interesting is there's no formal succession plan in place, meaning they are not a formal part of the operation. And I just wonder, a few years down the road, what kind of rub that could create for some of these next-gen farmers who are making some of these decisions, but aren't formal partners on the farm. So that's going to be something interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Get it on paper. May have the conversation. You know, the assumption is that your missions will match up with the missions of the established generation just simply because you're from the same family. It doesn't always work that way. Make sure that the mission lines up. Make sure that the values line up. Make sure that the goals are similar from generation to generation and that it's a shared goal in the overall success of the operation.
Chip Flory, you can catch him AgriTalk AM weekdays at 10 a.m. And then AgriTalk PM, you can catch him weekdays at 2 p.m. Central. Chip, safe travels. We really appreciate you joining us from the road this week.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, coming up next, a next-gen farmer blazing her own trail, but her path back to the farm, it was a bit unconventional. Clinton Griffith has her story next. Continuing with our focus on next-generation farmers this weekend, we meet a producer who operates a soybean, corn, and rice farm in Arkansas, Mississippi Delta. She was also the winner of this year's Top Producer Next Gen Award, Hallie Schaffner. Clinton Griffiths has her story.
The work never stops, even if the machines do at SFR Seed in Newport, Arkansas.
I haven't milled this all the way, but it's
Hallie Schaffner is focused on potential at her 2,000-acre operation, a family business specializing in seed production and research. Hallie is carrying on a mission her mother started back in 1988.
She trained me in how to increase pure seed stock of soybeans and rice. And it's been a journey of me learning what she did and then adopting new practices in the field, particularly in terms of rice work.
Which is somewhat new to the operation, now growing and maintaining about 20 different rice varieties in partnership with USDA.
We've been very lucky to have them helping us out in the field so that we can build our own rice purity program.
Raised in these fields, Hallie spent her childhood between the rows.
When I was little, my mom gave me an option. She said, you can go to church with your grandmother or you can go scout cotton with your dad. And that, as a kid, that's an easy choice, right? Because he would take me to McDonald's and we'd get, which he still does today. We'd stop and he'd say, go pick me 100 squares. And so we'd go out. We'd pick them, bring them back to the tailgate, open them up, look for bugs. And those are some of my best memories with my dad.
After college, encouraged to get out of ag, she lived all over the world, from Nashville to India, back to Seattle to Arkansas, then Peru and Spain.
I tried a lot of different things. I tried grant writing, I tried nonprofit work, I tried marketing, and I really didn't find anywhere where I fit in.
But agriculture was calling.
My dad needed to retire because he got his dementia diagnosis, and they said, you can come back if you want. If you don't, we'll just shut it down. And I thought, no, I don't, please don't do that.
Working with her mother, in 2019, she took the lead as CEO and continues to focus on growing the business, searching for opportunities in specialty crops and value-added production.
But in the Delta, we're so focused on commodities, we're so focused on volume that we kind of lose perspective on the specialty work. And there is a push now, knowing that the Delta has water and places like California do not. You know, there's going to be a big push for specialty work here in the South.
And she's doing it while focusing on sustainability.
Farmers are doing their part to combat the 10% carbon emissions that we are contributing to greenhouse gases. We need support from other industries. If we're making the investments in technology that we need to become more environmentally sustainable, other industries need to do so as well.
An exciting future built on the gifts from the past.
I'm extremely privileged. I come from a long history of farming. I'm a 6th-generation farmer. I will inherit land that's been in our family for over 100 years.
A mission learned from those days in the fields with her father and from watching her mother, the scientist.
I watched her walk confidently into every room and speak her mind. She was the expert. And I knew that I could do anything because I saw her do anything, right?
Confidence and precision. She's pouring into every day. as she works to carry on a legacy of innovation.
I'm proud to be a farmer. Like I said, farmers are the ultimate innovators. We have been since the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago. And I just am proud to be a part of that generation.
For U.S. Farm Report, I'm Clinton Griffiths reporting.
Thank you, Clinton. I love that story. All right, when we come back, a meaningful graduation, 2 generations in the works. That story's next.
Introducing Grow Getters with Davis Michelson, a podcast that shines light on agriculture's most innovative side hustles. Find the latest episodes on Farm Journal's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, continuing the Next Gen, but also Father's Day theme this weekend, a meaningful graduation, 2 generations in the works. In Vermont, a father-son duo graduated side by side from high school recently. Adam Moulton was just 17 years old when he dropped out of high school to help his father with the family dairy farm. Now, fast forward to when Adam's own son, Jonathan, was struggling with his studies in high school. Adam made a promise that if his son stuck with it, he would complete his own unfinished degree and graduate alongside him. And now they've both done just that. Congratulations, and what a positive note to end on this weekend. Well, thank you for joining us this weekend. We hope that you rejoin us next weekend here on U.S. Farm Report as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.